The glass of whiskey on the table was still cold when Benjamin Renard vanished from his farm in Martinsville, Indiana. Population 4,612. On the night of June 16, 1944, a summer storm swept across the Midwest, thunder crashing over the flooded fields along the White River. At 9:30 p.m., the nearby neighbor, Samuel Dorsey, saw Benjamin carrying a kerosene lantern as he walked toward the snake barn, the place where he always worked late whenever storms hit. In his hand was a wooden box containing freshly collected venom samples, along with his worn old cowboy hat, clipped with a brass letter B. A few minutes later, the light inside the snake barn suddenly went out amid the thunder, and the man was never seen again. What happened on that stormy night would become a mystery that haunted the entire town of Martinsville for more than 70 years afterward. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the latest cases. In 1944, while Europe was still engulfed in the sound of bombs and America poured everything into the war effort, Indiana retained the quiet, steady rhythm of Midwestern life. Defense factories ran day and night. The clatter of looms and the ring of hammers blended with the roar of trains carrying munitions through the region. Most of the local men had gone off to fight, leaving behind wives, mothers, and sisters to shoulder the work on farms, in machine shops, and small stores. Martinsville, an agricultural town nestled among cornfields and the quiet White River, lived off livestock, pharmaceutical processing, and animal hide trading. In the area, the Renard family farm stood out as unusual. It grew no crops and raised no livestock, instead specializing in breeding snakes to harvest venom for pharmaceutical companies in Indianapolis. Benjamin Renard, the farm's owner, was a young, resourceful man respected by the townspeople for daring to do what no one else would. His snake venom was used to produce antivenom and medical preparations for the military, making the farm the main source of income for the whole region. The family's wooden house sat on a low hill, with rows of rough tin and timber snake sheds behind it that always carried the scent of damp earth, sap, and faint venom. Outside, early summer winds carried the smell of rain, distant thunder rumbled, and trees swayed before the coming storm. Inside, Lindley, Benjamin's wife, was clearing the dinner table and glancing out the window at the flickering lantern light from the snake sheds. He had said he was going to check a few leaking pins, then disappeared into the curtain of rain. The night wore on, wind howled across the porch roof, and the little house fell silent. Lindley woke in the middle of the night, hearing no familiar footsteps on the porch, only the steady drip of rain on the steps. At first light, she threw on a robe, crossed the wet yard, and called out again and again with no answer. The snake barn door stood ajar. Inside it was empty, rows of cages dark, the floor streaked with muddy footprints and puddles. With her husband nowhere in sight, Lindley went back inside, hands trembling as she lifted the receiver of the old wall telephone. She called the town sheriff, her voice catching her husband, Benjamin Renard, had vanished the night before. On the other end of the line, the duty officer clearly heard the tremor in her voice, but calmly took notes and transferred the call to Sheriff Roy Atkins. He was drinking coffee in his small office when the news came, glancing up at the clock. 6:15 a.m. Outside, morning mist still hung in the air, and damp gusts from the night's rain blew down the empty main street. Atkins was a man of few words, accustomed to the petty incidents of a farming town, stray livestock, bar fights, petty theft. But when he heard the Renard snake farm, he paused. The name conjured images of a strange place. Chemical smells, rows of dark cages, and the man considered the oddest in the county. He radioed the two officers on night patrol, telling them to bring a camera and evidence bags. The black Ford left headquarters, tires crunching over the waterlogged dirt road. When they arrived, the sun was just peeking over the hills. Fog so thick visibility was barely a few dozen yards. Lindley Renard waited at the entrance, robe soaked, hands clasped tightly as if holding herself together. The sheriff stepped out, boots sinking into mud, and gave a slight nod. He glanced at the wooden house and low fences, then walked straight to the snake sheds behind it. The sharp smell of damp earth and venom hit him, mixing with the cold air. The shed door hung open, corrugated metal rattling in the wind. The concrete floor was streaked with water and a few faint boot prints, but nothing appeared disturbed. Several cages were empty, chains on the lids loose, the interiors pitch black. Atkins stepped back, jotted brief notes, then turned to Linley. She said that when the rain started the previous evening, Benjamin had said he was going to check the leaking pens. He put on his coat, took the lantern, and told her he'd only be a minute. She waited until midnight. When the light went out, she assumed he was sleeping in the outbuilding. This morning, when she went looking, he was gone, and the door was open. She spoke evenly and clearly, though her eyes were red and swollen, and her face pale. Atkins asked a few more questions about the victim's habits and family relationships, then had men search the yard. At that moment, the hired hand Michael Harper came from the direction of the storage shed. He looked exhausted, clothes caked with mud, and said he had slept in the back outbuilding. He'd heard a loud thud during the night, like something heavy hitting the floor, but thought a snake had gotten loose and didn't check. When he woke up and saw the mistress running around looking for the boss, he realized the boss was missing. Atkins took his statement, then sent the 2 officers to check the outbuilding and the back fence. No signs of forced entry, the doors were still locked. Inside the main house, the dinner dishes sat untouched on the table, a glass of water on the counter, the wall clock ticking steadily, just past 7. Everything was quiet, frozen mid-motion in an ordinary life. The sheriff stood in the kitchen, listening to the wind whistle outside the door, then walked back to the yard for one last look around. The property stretched wide, rows of sheds in a line, rainwater pooled on the ground, reflecting the gray sky. Atkins closed his notebook and signed the initial report, missing person, cause unknown. No evidence of foul play discovered. He had the equipment packed up and ordered the area around the snake shed sealed. As they drove away, he looked back once more, the shed door still ajar, swaying lightly in the wind, the metallic clank echoing through the damp air like the slow ticking of a secret slowly closing shut. The morning after the initial report was filed, Sheriff Roy Atkins called an emergency meeting at Martinsville headquarters to organize an official search operation. Word of the disappearance at the Renard snake farm had spread across the area within hours, drawing curious onlookers. A man vanishing in the middle of a rainy night, with no trace, no clues. It was something that almost never happened in a quiet little town like this. Atkins ordered every available officer in the county mobilized and put out a call for local volunteers. By mid-morning, nearly 40 people had gathered on the empty lot in front of the farm gate. Police, firefighters, hunters, farmers, and a few recently discharged young veterans. They were divided into small teams, each assigned a sector marked on maps and wooden stakes. One team swept the area around the main house, another fanned out into the western fields, and the rest headed toward the White River half a mile away. Fog still hung thick. Steam rose from the soaked ground after the night's rain, cutting visibility to a few dozen yards. Tracking dogs were released, noses to the ground, following the scent from a jacket Linley had given Atkins. At first they circled the snake sheds, gave a short bark, then veered off, pulling their handlers toward the riverbank. Boot prints were jumbled in the mud, some still fresh, but rain had washed most away. Atkins followed close behind, eyes fixed on the murky water where branches drifted slowly past like ominous signs. Rivermen rowed wooden boats with lanterns, scanning both banks. Calls of Benjamin's name echoed off the rocks and dissolved into the sound of flowing water. The wind carried a dank, fishy smell that made everyone shiver. By noon they had found nothing but a few broken branches and a small skid mark on the clay. Atkins had the area cordoned off, marked the spots, and directed other teams to expand eastward. As afternoon fell, the sky turned gray again, a light drizzle began, and the teams returned in silence, clothes caked with mud, boots heavy. Linley stood on the porch watching the line of people come back. She asked nothing, shed no tears. The sheriff only gave her a slight nod, then quietly told his deputy they would have to expand the radius another mile the next morning. On the second day, the search began at dawn. People from nearby towns, Paragon, Wilbur, and Brooklyn, came to help, bringing horses, lanterns, and small boats. A few off-duty defense plant veterans volunteered too. They split into 8 teams and planted flags to mark every area covered. Dogs barked and voices shouted through the woods, but only echoes answered. The White River still ran muddy. Boat crews probed every bend, dropping iron poles to the bottom, but nothing surfaced. Near the bank, an officer found a few small scraps of cloth caught in tree roots, but after examination, they turned out to be just burlap pieces. Everyone kept working until evening, when heavy rain forced them to stop. That night at headquarters, the area map lay spread across the table. Red circles, marking searched zones, covered nearly the entire 1-mile radius around the farm. Atkins drew new boundary lines in pencil, extending the search south to the Owen County line, where there were remote reed beds and deep ponds few people ever visited. The next morning, the search parties set out again. The weather had cleared a little, sunlight peeking through clouds, but the ground was still damp and the smell of mud thick. Some men carried binoculars and walked the hillsides, scanning dense woods from afar. Small boats continued sweeping the river, lanterns sweeping across the water. Everything proceeded methodically and carefully, yet the result remained zero. 3 full days passed without a single trace of Benjamin. No clothing, no belongings, no body. Every clue stopped at the snake sheds and the riverbank. Atkins wrote in his report, "No leads discovered. No evidence the victim left the area by any means." The search continued into the 4th day, but manpower was exhausted. Though teams still moved slowly through woods and over slopes, hope was fading. By sunset, the sky was leaden, frogs croaked along the marshes, and lanterns flickered in the fog. The sheriff stood for a long time, gazing at the quietly swirling White River, then turned away. On the map, back in his office, the red dots were connected by thick pencil lines, proof of a thorough but fruitless effort. He added the final line to the interim report. Large-scale search of the entire South Martinsville area, negative results. No body or personal effects belonging to Benjamin Renard recovered. Outside the window, the lights from the Renard farm still glimmered faintly in the mist like a tiny beacon in the vast fields where a man had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only silence and dried mud. After 4 days of fruitless searching, Sheriff Roy Atkins shifted focus to compiling initial information and taking statements from anyone who might have seen or spoken to Benjamin Renard before he disappeared. Martinsville was a small town where everyone knew everyone, so canvassing didn't take long. On the morning of June 20th, Atkins and 2 officers went door to door in the neighborhood around the Renard farm, starting with the home of elderly neighbors James and Mrs. Ellery, half a mile north. Mrs. Ellery said that on the evening of June 16th, when the rain started, she saw the light in the Renard snake barn stay on late, but heard no voices. Her husband recalled hearing a strange noise like a metal door slamming hard, but thought it was just the wind. The next morning, when he passed the main road, Benjamin's truck was gone. He assumed the man had gone into town. That statement matched the time Lindley said her husband left the house around 9 o'clock. Leaving the Ellerys, the investigators spoke to Charles Dunn, the regular delivery man for the farm. Dunn confirmed he had delivered 2 wooden crates of venom bottles to Benjamin on the morning of the 16th, around 10 o'clock, before the rain. He said Benjamin looked healthy and cheerful, talking about preparing a new shipment for Indianapolis early the following week. Nothing unusual in his words or behavior. Next, the police stopped at the town post office to check whether the victim had sent or received anything unusual. Head clerk Mildred Crane said Benjamin's last visit had been 3 days before the disappearance, only to pick up commercial mail from a drug company in Chicago. Nothing noteworthy. Atkins recorded every statement, then returned to the station to line up the timeline. The last confirmed sighting of Benjamin was the evening of June 16th, near the southern snake sheds, around 8:45 p.m. After that moment, no one saw him. He summoned Lindley to headquarters to clarify a few more details about her husband's work and daily routine. She brought the farm's revenue ledger and Benjamin's work schedule. According to the records, the Renard farm supplied venom to 3 pharmaceutical companies in the state and was about to sign a new contract with a laboratory in Ohio. Benjamin had no plans to leave town or travel in the coming days. There were no recorded debts or business disputes. Atkins examined every line, then asked about other employees. Besides Michael Harper, there was only an accountant in town who rarely visited the farm. All recent orders had been fulfilled normally. That afternoon, back at the scene, he and a technician re-examined the snake sheds thoroughly. The metal cages were still locked, dangerous specimens numbered, no signs of forced entry or escaped snakes. The loose lids Lindley mentioned were found to be caused by rust from wind and rain. In the preparation room, mixing tools, glass vials and gloves sat exactly where they had been left. No unusual specimens or spilled chemicals. Atkins noted in the report, no evidence of a struggle or crime at the scene, no proof snakes escaped or injured the victim. He had the entire shed area photographed and marked the spot where the lantern believed to be the one Benjamin carried that night was found near the door, but it showed no damage or impact marks. In the yard, the old mud tracks had dried. Footprints were almost completely washed away by rain. The technical team concluded it was impossible to determine the victim's direction of movement. Atkins stood quietly for a moment, looking toward the distant White River, where the search had just ended. In his mind, a precise timeline was forming. Morning of the 16th, Benjamin received a delivery. That afternoon, he worked as usual. That evening, he went to the snake sheds to check for leaks, then vanished. Everything stopped at that point. No witnesses, no physical evidence, no signs of violence. When night fell, he sat alone in his office under the yellow lamp glow, the map covered with search circles spread before him. He reread every statement, underlined evening of June 16th, near the snake sheds in red, then added the temporary conclusion to the file. Victim missing, cause undetermined. Last seen, June 16th, 1944, approximately 20:45. No evidence of crime or animal-related accident. The pen stopped. He leaned back in his chair, gazing through the half-open window, where the night wind carried the sound of insects and the distinctive damp earth smell of the Midwest, the scent of mysteries quietly seeping into the ground that no one yet understood. The morning after the consolidated report was completed, Sheriff Roy Atkins decided to expand the search beyond the farm's grounds, focusing on 2 priority areas: the strip of land along the White River bank and the low muddy fields to the south, where the sunken terrain was more likely to retain traces. The sun had just risen. Thick fog still clung to the birch groves, and the weak light filtering through it gave everything a pale, corpse-like whiteness, like the cold breath of the earth. The search team consisted of 8 men, 3 deputies, 2 militia members, and 3 local residents, carrying shovels, gloves, ropes, and a large camera to document the scene. Lindley did not join them, but stood on the porch, watching until the group disappeared behind the row of snake sheds. Atkins led the way, walking slowly through the waterlogged mud, his rubber boots sticking with every step and making a heavy squelching sound each time he lifted them. They headed toward the riverbank, where the tracking dogs had picked up the scent days earlier. Wind off the water carried the fishy stench of algae and stagnant mud. The White River was running fast this season, the water the color of milk, dragging branches and trash along with it. At the first bend, one of the deputies spotted something half buried in the tall grass along the bank, a brown leather glove, soaked through and caked with mud. Atkins immediately signaled a halt, crouched down, used tweezers to lift the glove into an evidence bag, and marked the location on his map. A few yards farther on, 2 faint shoe prints were visible in the damp soil, pointing toward the water. The prints were blurred but clear enough to identify as heavy-soled work boots, the same kind Benjamin always wore on the job. Atkins photographed them, made notes, and later compared them to the victim's shoes back at the house. The result was only possible match. The rain had blurred the impressions too much for certainty. From the riverbank, the team split in two directions. One group followed the shore downstream, the other turned back toward the marshy reeds. Along the way they found a few minor traces, flattened patches of grass, a scrap of gray cloth snagged on a thorn bush, several fresh skid marks, but nothing specific enough to draw conclusions. Around noon the sky darkened, and a sudden heavy shower poured down, the rain hammering the ground until it bubbled, washing away most of the remaining traces. Atkins pulled his hat lower and watched the water erase the faint prints beneath his feet. He sighed, knowing the weather was working against them. When the rain eased, only muddy smears remained, impossible to tell new from old. He ordered the teams back to the old wooden cabin by the river for a break, then flipped through his notebook, cross-checking every location they had covered. In total, they had expanded the search over more than 2 square miles, yet the only physical evidence recovered was the mud-caked glove. Atkins studied the sealed item, weighing whether it could have belonged to Benjamin or someone else. The leather was soft, an imported brand from Chicago, fairly expensive, typically used for precision work, not heavy labor. He remembered Benjamin always wore thick, canvas-lined gloves. Nothing like this one. That small discrepancy troubled him. In the afternoon, as the sky cleared, he sent the forensics team back to the shoeprint site to take soil samples. They dug down several inches, filled glass jars with wet earth, and took them for analysis of compaction and mud composition, hoping to determine whether the prints had been made before or after the rain on the night of the 16th. Preliminary results showed the soil had been compressed before the main downpour, meaning the prints could have been made the very night Benjamin disappeared. However, because the mud had liquefied, they could not measure depth or estimate the weight of the person who made them. In the report, the technician wrote, "Footprints lead toward the river. No return prints observed. Subject may have walked down to the bank and not come back." That note only deepened Atkins' sense of unease. If Benjamin had really gone to the river, what was he doing there in the middle of a rainy night? And the glove, why only one? He had men comb the bank all afternoon, wading through the tall reeds, but they never found the mate. By late afternoon, as weak golden sunlight slanted through the clouds, they ended the day's search with no better results than when they started. All recovered evidence was sealed and taken back to headquarters. Atkins ordered the glove dried, close-up photographs taken of the stitching, and a fabric sample sent to the state lab for origin tracing. On the drive home he sat silently in the truck, staring through the rain-streaked window at the flooded fields stretching on both sides and the white river in the distance, reflecting a pale sunset. He knew that with every passing hour wind and water were erasing whatever traces might remain. Back at the office, he spread the map on his desk and marked the new finds in red pencil, the glove location, the shoe prints, the trampled reeds. Connected, they formed a faint curve pointing downstream. No body, no personal effects, nothing that definitively identified anyone. He underlined the provisional conclusion, origin of evidence undetermined. Heavy rainfall obliterated traces, insufficient data to conclude criminal act. That night, Martinsville lay shrouded in thick fog. The light from headquarters reflected off the misty windows like a lone streak of brightness in the dark. In his small office, Atkins sat at the desk, staring at the dried glove in its evidence tray, a heavy weight in his chest. Everything about this disappearance remained fragmented, like puzzle pieces that refused to fit, and the only thing they had was a nameless, mud-stained object, the fragile clue of a man who had vanished into a summer rainstorm. When the riverbank report was finalized and still yielded no clear answers, Sheriff Roy Atkins shifted the investigation to Benjamin Renard's personal life, looking for any conflicts or hidden motives in the man's daily existence or business that might explain the disappearance. He sent 2 deputies to examine financial records at Martinsville Savings and Trust, where Benjamin kept both his personal account and the farm's line of credit. The record showed that in the past 6 months, Benjamin had taken out a sizable loan to expand the snake sheds and upgrade venom extraction equipment, $8,000, a considerable sum in 1944, that was not yet fully repaid. Interest payments, however, were current, and there were no signs of financial distress. At the same time, the bank confirmed Benjamin had filed paperwork to purchase a small riverside parcel for a private research area. The application was pending because the mortgage had not been finalized. From the documents, Atkins concluded that Benjamin was methodical, not reckless in business, but was carrying moderate financial pressure. He next ordered a review of insurance policies and discovered something noteworthy. 3 weeks before disappearing, Benjamin had signed a new $25,000 life insurance policy with Mutual of Indiana, naming his wife Lindley Renard as sole beneficiary. When questioned, Lindley confirmed Benjamin had initiated the policy himself, and she had not been involved in signing it. Copies at the insurance company showed the process was proper, with no signs of fraud or dispute. Still, the detail was flagged in the case file for continued monitoring. After finishing the financial review, Atkins directed deputies to gather personal records, diplomas, background checks, farm operating permits, venomous animal registry, and employee list. Everything was neatly filed in cabinets at the Renard house, confirming the man's orderly habits. Medical records showed Benjamin was healthy, with no chronic illnesses or psychiatric history. Employment records listed only one full-time worker, Michael Harper, the longtime hand who lived on the property. Benjamin also contracted short-term with several snakeskin buyers and laboratories in Chicago, Cleveland, and Indianapolis. Atkins contacted those partners to verify recent transactions. Nearly all described Benjamin as professional, punctual, and free of disputes. 1. Edward Colson, a pharmaceutical representative from Chicago, said he had met Benjamin at a scientific conference 2 months earlier and had been impressed by his deep knowledge of venom extraction. He described him as calm, reserved, but intensely focused, with no signs of instability or stress. In town, Benjamin was known as reclusive. He spent most of his time at the farm. Neighbors called him polite but distant, and no one recalled any quarrels. A few had seen the Renards shopping together on weekends and said they appeared normal. No one mentioned arguments. Michael Harper, in a follow-up statement, said Benjamin was fair, never raised his voice, and was interested only in work, sometimes staying up all night, checking the snake cages. Harper insisted there had never been any conflict or money disputes. Payroll records confirmed Harper was paid regularly each month. Nothing unusual. Tax reports for the Renard farm for the past 2 years, obtained from the county clerk, were all in order. When cross-checked against the ledgers Lindley provided, and the figures matched almost perfectly. No hidden expenditures or unexplained transactions. At this point, Benjamin's personal, financial, and professional life was organized into neat sections in the case file: finances stable, no crisis, new life insurance policy, limited social contacts, no known enemies, no property disputes. Yet Atkins still felt an indefinable gap in the picture, a silence behind the seemingly perfect numbers and statements. He wondered whether that extreme carefulness concealed something else, or was merely the habit of a man who lived surrounded by deadly snakes and chemicals. When he wrote the final lines of that day's report, he underlined 3 items: bank debt, new insurance policy, planned research expansion. They were not enough to prove anything, but neither could they be ignored. Outside, rain fell again, the drops drumming steadily on the tin roof of headquarters and blending with the slow tick of the wall clock. Atkins sat motionless, eyes fixed on the thick file, thinking of the man who had vanished without a trace, leaving behind an apparently flawless life and a trail of data so smooth it felt unsettling. 1 week after Benjamin Renard disappeared, the Martinsville police search efforts had exhausted nearly every resource without result. The reports piling up on Sheriff Roy Atkins' desk now repeated the same conclusion. No new traces, no additional evidence. The entire area around the farm had been searched 3 times, each time pushing several miles farther south and east. But nothing was found beyond old rain-erased shoe prints. Overhead, militia observers flew 2 passes over the White River in a small reconnaissance plane, yet saw only thick brown water and endless reed marshes. Atkins stood on the riverbank watching the ripples, then returned to headquarters with the familiar hollow feeling. On the 7th day, he signed an order expanding the search radius to 10 miles from the center of the Renard farm, including the low hills bordering Owen County and the dense riverside forest locals called Green Marsh, because grass grew there year-round. The search teams were now half the size they had been at the start, partly because of bad weather, partly because many men had to return to defense factory jobs. Still, they carried oil lanterns, shovels, and rope, moving slowly through woods and creeks. Each evening they came back soaked, mud to the knees, carrying nothing but exhaustion. On the wall map at the station, red marks now crowded together. Atkins used a ruler to connect them into a wide circle that covered the entire outskirts of Martinsville. Beneath it he wrote in pencil, "No results. Search suspended at nightfall." Deep down a thought was taking shape. If the man was still somewhere nearby, he was probably in a place no one could see. At 10 p.m., a Martinsville Herald truck pulled up outside. A young reporter came in asking for an official statement for the morning edition. Atkins hesitated, then said only, "We are still searching." The next day the paper ran a bold half-page headline, "Snake Breeder Vanishes After Summer Storm." The article recounted the events in a tone both curious and chilling, emphasizing the eerie snake farm, the heavy rain on the night of June 16th, and how Benjamin, described as Indiana's leading venomous snake breeder, had suddenly vanished as though swallowed by the very world he had created. The story spread beyond Martinsville, appearing in the Bloomington Courier and Indianapolis Star, each offering its own theory. Some said he was bitten and fell into the river, others called it the strangest disappearance since the war began. The press sensationalized it, and townspeople began to gossip. At the cafe on Main Street, between radio bulletins about the war in Europe, people whispered that Benjamin had suffered an occupational accident, bitten by one of his own snakes. Others suspected family trouble, noting that Linley seemed too calm for a woman whose husband had just vanished. A few expressed sympathy, seeing only the tragedy of a man too devoted to dangerous work. While public opinion split, the Renard farm was temporarily sealed, doors locked, and state veterinarians inspected the snake sheds for public safety. Police posted warning signs, but local kids still sneaked their bicycles close, peering from a distance at the silent property where, rumor had it, something rustled at night. Atkins received dozens of calls, most tips: someone saw a light by the river, someone heard a scream in the woods, but none could be verified. He began to feel pressure from the press, from county officials, and from the expectant eyes of citizens who wanted answers he did not have. One evening, looking again at the short list of evidence on his desk, a few photographs, one glove, some statements, and a water-stained map, he realized every effort was circling back to the beginning. No body, no belongings, no sign of crime. At that point, the case was simply the baffling disappearance of Benjamin Renard. And while another storm gathered in the South, newspapers kept printing, rumors kept spreading, and Martinsville, the small town in the heart of Indiana, split into two camps. One believing Benjamin had died in a work accident, the other convinced that behind the silence lay a secret inside his own family. By late August 1944, after more than 2 months of fruitless investigation and searching, the Martinsville police had to admit they were at a dead end. Search teams were fully withdrawn, and newspapers stopped running news stories once there was nothing left to milk. In the final report sent to the Monroe County office, Sheriff Roy Atkins wrote, "No evidence of criminal activity detected, no physical proof of violence. Case classified missing person, cause undetermined." The conclusion was signed on August 21st, and officially closed investigation file, #4400617, archived at the Bloomington Sheriff's headquarters, per regulation. The few documents, photographs and samples were sealed and placed in a small wooden crate labeled Renard, Benjamin, missing person. In town, the story of the vanished snake breeder slowly faded, overtaken by war news and the shortages of autumn 1944. Linley Renard, after completing administrative paperwork, received the $25,000 life insurance payout from Mutual of Indiana, roughly 10 years' income for an average farm. She remained silent, gave no interviews, and appeared in public only once, at City Hall, to sign over property ownership. A few weeks later, a new sign went up at the gate: Renard Farm, entire property and equipment for sale. The assets were purchased by an Illinois dealer at below market price, including the snake sheds, outbuildings, and venom extraction tools. Lindley packed her belongings, shipped several crates to Chicago, and left Martinsville on an early morning bus in mid-September. No one knew where she went. The ticket seller only remembered she carried 2 large leather suitcases and a small brass-locked wooden box. As the bus pulled away from the station, morning fog blanketed the road heading south, and the figure of the woman by the window became just a fading blur behind the glass. Weeks later, the Renard farm was gradually dismantled for redevelopment. The snake sheds were sealed, some specimens transferred to the research lab in Bloomington. The rusted iron Renard sign was removed and hung temporarily in the county warehouse, a relic of the strange disappearance that had once stirred the whole region. When Sheriff Atkins signed the last line of the file, he added a short marginal note: "No body, no evidence, no leads. Case not fully closed." Then he shut the ledger and locked it in the steel cabinet. That night, Martinsville returned to its quiet rhythm, and the name Benjamin Renard was mentioned less and less as years passed, as though he had never existed. A man who disappeared after a summer storm, leaving behind only a closed file numbered #440617. 72 years later, in the summer of 2016, the land that had once been the Renard farm had completely changed its appearance. The Martinsville outskirts had become a small industrial zone, dotted with warehouses and machine shops. That 5-acre parcel had been purchased by White River Aggregate, a construction materials company, to expand its concrete storage yard. On July 11th, as a crew was demolishing the old concrete foundation on the southern side, the exact spot where the snake sheds had once stood, their excavator struck something hard, buried nearly 10 feet deep. At first they thought it was a metal pipe or a piece of old equipment, but as they dug it out, a square weathered object with rounded edges and a heavily rusted surface slowly emerged from the mud. One worker scraped away the dirt with a shovel and discovered an old-fashioned brass padlock on the surface, the kind made in the 1940s. It looked like a sealed iron box, coated in decades of rust and weighing more than 90 pounds. The site foreman immediately ordered work stopped, cordoned off the area, and called the Martinsville Police Department. 2 patrol cars arrived shortly afterward and set up barriers. A young officer took notes and photographed the scene, while the workers gathered around, whispering among themselves. Someone vaguely remembered that this had once been the land of that snake breeder guy who disappeared way back, a story the old-timers still told like local folklore. About 2 hours later, the Morgan County Sheriff's Office contacted the Indiana State Police Forensic Unit, requesting specialists because the object was now considered a possible artifact connected to an old case. By afternoon, a gray forensic van pulled up to the gate, carrying magnetic scanners and endoscopes. They set up a tent against the rain and lit the excavation area with floodlights. Technicians wearing gloves used wire brushes to clean the dirt from around the lid, then carefully lifted the object out of the pit. On the side of the box was a barely visible stamped serial number, apparently a manufacturer's mark from a Bloomington metalworks. One specialist recognized the sliding brass lock as a wartime style commonly used for storing specimens, documents, or military supplies. When they ran a metal detector over it, the central area gave a strong signal along with hollow reverberation, indicating the interior was not solid. Martinsville Police Chief Mark Dalton, the current chief, signed the temporary seizure form and reported to the state the possible link to case file #440617, which had been archived in Bloomington since 1944. Word of the discovery spread overnight and appeared in the local news under a small headline, "Mysterious Metal Object Found on Renard Property." The next day, Indiana state authorities officially confirmed they had sent a special investigative team to the site, working with the forensic unit to determine the origin of the iron box. A small-scale excavation was resumed on the spot under the supervision of criminalists and a representative from the prosecutor's office. The area was fully fenced off, and all construction was halted. Local residents gathered at a distance to watch and talk endlessly. Some said it was probably leftover war materials. Others speculated it might be hidden post-war valuables. But in the hearts of many older Martinsville residents, memories of Benjamin Renard's disappearance suddenly resurfaced, a story that had been buried along with the years. When the box was loaded onto the forensic transport van bound for the state lab in Indianapolis, a light rain began to fall, the droplets running down the old rust in dark brown streaks. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood. If this object was truly connected to file hash 440617, a secret buried for more than 7 decades was about to be uncovered. A case thought closed since wartime was suddenly coming back to life under the cold lights of a modern forensic lab. 3 days after the object arrived at the State Forensic Lab in Indianapolis, the team finished cleaning the exterior and opened the seal in the presence of representatives from the Morgan County Sheriff's Office and the Indiana State Police Cold Case Unit. The heavily oxidized iron box required an industrial cutter to separate the lid. As the saw blade bit into the rusted metal, the smell of burning iron mixed with damp earth filled the room in dead silence. When the lid finally came off, a puff of cold, moldy air escaped, and inside, among dried mud and bits of rotted paper, the specialists saw a jumble of items: a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver, its barrel pointing to the right and covered in rust spots, a leather strap about 1 meter long, rotted at both ends, but still bearing a brass buckle, an Elgin wristwatch with a cracked crystal, its hands frozen at 8:52, and a torn scrap of paper, almost illegible, showing only a few faint characters and the numbers 4406, blurred by water damage. When they turned over the inside of the lid, one technician noticed 2 hand-carved initials, crudely scratched but still clear. BR matching Benjamin Renard's initials. The coincidence made the entire team pause in silence for several seconds. At the bottom of the box were traces of fine sand and tiny unidentifiable bone fragments, possibly organic remains or pieces of animal shell, all sealed separately in evidence bags. The preliminary report noted that the items were consistent in style and materials with the 1940s, matching the time frame of the disappearance. The revolver was a common civilian model from the World War II era. Its serial number was too worn to trace. The leather strap showed signs of having been stretched hard before rotting. The cleaned Elgin watch revealed an engraving on the back, 2B. For summer 43, L, small but sharp under magnification. The L immediately made everyone think of Linley Renard, the only wife listed in the 1944 file. The torn paper was sent to document restoration. Initial examination suggested it was part of a receipt or administrative form that had been partially burned before getting wet and rotting. While the technicians continued photographing and sampling, Cold Case Unit Lieutenant Nora Gibson, who was personally present to receive the evidence, was already there. She had worked dozens of decades-old unsolved cases, and upon seeing the carved BR on the lid, she immediately requested the original hash 440617 file from the Bloomington archive. The original dossier arrived within 2 hours. 12 yellowed pages in a hard folder stamped missing person. Unsolved. Comparing the old notes with the new evidence, Gibson noticed startling matches. The 1944 report stated the victim vanished after a June storm near the Snake Sheds, the exact location where the box was found. Benjamin's personal property inventory explicitly listed Elgin wristwatch, brown leather band, back engraved L. She underlined that line in red, then looked at the revolver in the steel tray. That detail had never appeared in the original file. No one had ever mentioned Benjamin owning a gun. This opened new possibilities. Either someone buried evidence to hide a crime, or Benjamin himself had hidden something before disappearing. The lab continued analyzing the mud, clinging to the objects, Sediment composition matched the stratigraphy along the White River bank, less than half a mile from the snake sheds. Every clue pointed to the same conclusion. This was not a randomly buried object, but one placed deliberately, likely at the time of the disappearance. By late afternoon, Gibson signed a memo to state headquarters recommending re-evaluation of the 1944 Benjamin Renard disappearance as a potential criminal homicide. A copy of the report with photos was sent to the cold case unit in Indianapolis that same night. Beneath her signature, she wrote by hand, "Evidence consistent with potential concealment, recommend case reopening." The next morning, the cold case unit issued an internal notice confirming that file hash 440617 was being returned to active investigation status. A task force was quickly formed, bringing together forensic specialists, criminal investigators, and judicial history consultants to review all data. On the assignment list, Megan Crowell, age 39, was named lead coordinator, a 39-year-old detective formerly with the Indianapolis Violent Crimes Unit. Renowned for her ability to reconstruct scenes and trace old files from scattered evidence. That same morning, she went to the Central Archive, which holds more than 2,000 unsolved cases from the previous century. Wearing gloves, she opened the sealed box labeled hash 440617 and read through the yellowed pages of Sheriff Roy Atkins' handwritten 1944 report, "No body, no evidence, no signs of violence." Beneath that line was still visible, the sheriff's red scrawl, "Case not fully closed." One note made her pause longer than usual. She ordered the entire file digitized, every page scanned, every stamp photographed, then created an evidence index. The original items were stored in the cold case unit's cold vault. The Smith & Wesson revolver, the leather strap, the Elgin watch, the torn paper, and the remaining mud from the iron box. Everything received new barcodes and was resealed for modern testing. In her investigation plan, Megan divided the process into 3 phases: document reconstruction, witness verification, criminal possibility analysis. The first phase lasted 2 weeks and focused on recovering all administrative, financial, and personal records related to Benjamin Renard. She worked with the state archives to obtain copies of death records, none existed, marriage certificate, insurance policies, and bank documents. Most had been digitized and showed Benjamin as a legal citizen and registered Martinsville farmer, with one wife, Lindley Renard, and one employee, Michael Harper. A 1944 Mutual of Indiana life insurance policy was found intact. The sole beneficiary was Lindley. Megan highlighted that line and noted in the margin, "Check payout records, final recipient residence after leaving Martinsville." Next, she asked the Civil Records Division to search for any surviving witnesses. From the original file, 3 names remained: Michael Harper, Mildred Crane, and neighbor James Ellery. Current data showed only Ellery's son still alive, age 83, in Bloomington. Harper had died in 1987. Crane in the 1990s. Megan still planned to locate their descendants for any inherited memories, letters, or documents. She called the Monroe County Library for help, locating original 1944 articles from the Martinsville Herald and Indianapolis Star. 2 days later, scanned copies arrived, including an old photo of the sealed Renard farm, leaning wooden fence. Police beside a black Ford. Caption, "Snake breeder vanishes after summer storm." Looking at the picture, Megan realized the revolver matched the type issued to local police between 1940 and 1945, prompting another note. Evidence may not belong to victim, possible murder weapon concealed. In the task force's first meeting, Megan presented a relationship diagram. Benjamin, Lindley, Harper, business contacts, bank, insurance company. Every line led back to Lindley Renard, who had left town in 1944 and left no forwarding address. She requested immigration and Social Security searches for any records under that name or similar variants, plus a nationwide query for Lindley Renard and possible misspellings. While awaiting results, the technical team analyzed the evidence with modern methods. Initial findings showed soil on the gun contained iron sulfate and plant humus matching samples from the White River bank. The main search area in 1944. This strengthened the likelihood the box was buried at the time of the disappearance. The torn paper, after UV treatment, revealed part of a typed line, Ren, contract. June 15, the date, June 15, was the last day. Benjamin was seen alive. It sent a chill down Megan's spine. She noted, possibly part of a transaction or contract document. An interim report went to the cold case unit director, in which Megan stated, "High probability, the 1944 incident was not accidental. Evidence structure indicates deliberate concealment. Recommend pursuing as criminal investigation." In the following days, Megan and the team rebuilt the entire timeline. Evening of June 16th. Benjamin goes to the snake sheds during a storm, never returns. 2-month search, declared missing. Lindley collects insurance and leaves town. When the events were pinned to the board, everything looked like a map: timing, motive, benefit, and a 70-year gap. On Friday afternoon, sitting alone in her office, with sunlight streaming through the window onto the old photo of the Renard farm, Megan wrote in her investigation notebook, "All signs point to a meticulously concealed homicide staged as a wartime disappearance. Financial motive and opportunity, both present." She underlined the sentence 3 times. A new beginning for a case that had slept more than 70 years. Immediately after receiving Megan Crowell's directive, the Indiana State Forensic Lab began comprehensive modern testing of every item recovered from the iron box. Under strict conditions, the specialists separated each piece: the revolver, leather strap, watch, paper fragment, and soil residue with tiny bone fragments, for microscopic analysis. A 3D laser scanner reconstructed surfaces and corrosion levels to estimate burial duration. After nearly 2 weeks, the results dated the metal oxidation to oxygen-deprived conditions, lasting 70-75 years, precisely matching a 1944 burial. Carbon isotope measurements on fabric fibers inside the box yielded the same time frame, confirming everything was buried during or shortly after World War II. At the biology bench, lead specialist Dr. Andrew Klein isolated small amounts of dried protein on the leather strap and gun grip, then sent samples for biochemical testing. Serological reactions detected ancient hemoglobin, blood typing confirmed Group O. Cross-referencing Benjamin Renard's 1938 Bloomington Hospital records showed his blood type as O, an exact match. This was the first direct forensic link between evidence and victim. Dr. Klein wrote, "Blood denatured but type clearly identifiable. Insufficient intact DNA for nuclear profiling, yet long-chain proteins remain." Meanwhile, the ballistics team examined the Smith & Wesson .38. After cleaning rust and microscopic inspection, they found gunpowder residue and copper fouling inside the barrel, proof the gun had been fired at least once before burial. The barrel showed slight deformation consistent with a hard impact. They reconstructed the shot and determined it was fired at close range, under 1 meter. Though no body existed for comparison, combined with blood on the grip and strap, the lab's preliminary conclusion was that a violent act occurred at or near the discovery site, causing instant death, after which the body or evidence was hastily buried to conceal the crime. Soil analysis inside the box revealed multiple layers, first mud mixed with sand, then cement dust, then high calcium content, evidence of rainwater mixed concrete. This proved the box was buried before the new concrete foundation was poured, meaning during the farm's original operational period. Under an electron microscope, technicians found tiny brown wool cotton fibers on the strap's brass buckle, material used in 1940s men's work jackets, matching the description of Benjamin's clothing the night he left the house on June 16. In a 48-page final report, Dr. Klein concluded, "All samples and soil are consistent in age, reflecting a single burial event between 1944-1946. Blood is type O, compatible with Benjamin Renard's medical records. Items show impact and violent use. No evidence of post-burial movement. High probability victim died at the scene." The report went directly to the cold case unit, and was entered into the state judicial system. As Megan read every line, she stopped at the final assessment. Degree of blood degradation and material structure indicate victim was dead before burial. No signs of survival after placement in the container. In her investigation journal she added, forensic results completely rule out accident or voluntary disappearance. This was premeditated murder, executed under prepared conditions, with the goal of long-term concealment. From an unsolved missing person file, hard science had now painted the picture of a crime buried beneath 70 years of concrete. The gun, the strap, the watch, the blood, all silently told the same story. Benjamin Renard did not leave Martinsville of his own free will. He died on the land he had called home, and was hidden beneath the very farm he had built with his life. When the forensic examination results were released, Megan Crowell moved to the next phase of the investigation plan, tracking down any witnesses who might still be alive, or who had once had indirect contact with the 1944 case. From digitized old records, the team uncovered a name that had never appeared in the original files. Ashley Shaw, listed as friend of Lindley Renard, briefly employed at the farm in 1943. According to residency records, Ashley was born in 1923, lived in Bloomington until the early 1950s, then moved away. Megan asked the Bureau of Vital Records to run the name, and within days the reply came back. Ashley Shaw had died in 2009 at the age of 86. However, the probate file listed a niece, Margaret Shaw, still living in Terre Haute and in possession of all her aunt's personal papers. Megan immediately drove to meet Margaret, carrying proper authorization letters and copies of the case file. The meeting took place in a small log house on the edge of the woods, where Margaret, a woman in her early 60s, who had lived alone since retirement, greeted the investigators calmly, but with visible surprise when she heard the name Lindley Renard, a name she said to have surfaced only in vague stories her aunt told near the end of her life. After reviewing the paperwork, Margaret opened an old wooden trunk, took out a brown leather-bound notebook and a sealed envelope, and said both had belonged to Ashley. According to her, her aunt had kept them in a desk drawer for decades, with instructions that if anyone ever comes asking about Lindley Renard, give these to them. Megan brought the notebook back to the cold case unit and turned it over to the documents section. The yellowed pages, written in neat slanted handwriting, contained short, fragmented entries, more like personal memos than a diary. On the page dated June 17, 1944, a line in faint blue ink stood out in the middle of the page. Lindley came by very late, carrying a cloth bag, said she needed help with something at the farm, mixing cement to seal the floors before dawn. The next page read, I didn't ask much, just remember the damp earth smell and the clanging of metal. She said it had to be finished that night. I didn't see Ben anywhere. At the bottom, a scrawled note. If anyone ever reads this, remember, it wasn't just cement. The wording was vague but strongly suggested Lindley had been at the scene the very night Benjamin disappeared. When Megan cross-checked the timeline, the date in the notebook matched the disappearance exactly. She immediately asked Margaret to come in for a formal statement. In her witness report, Margaret said Ashley had once told her that on that night, Lindley showed up at her house around midnight, carrying a bag with small metal tools, and asked for help mixing cement. The two women drove a small pickup to the Renard property and stopped behind the main house. Ashley clearly remembered the rain and the dim kerosene lamp. Lindley told her to pour the cement into a hollow section of the snake barn floor, saying it was to reinforce the base against water seepage. When they finished, Lindley paid her a little money and drove her home. Margaret never saw Lindley again after that night. When Megan asked why her aunt never went to the police, Margaret repeated Ashley's words. She didn't know what had happened, only that Lindley was unnaturally calm. She was afraid of getting dragged into trouble, so she stayed quiet. Inside the accompanying envelope, besides the notebook, was a loose sheet, an old carbon copy from another notebook containing scattered lines in black ink. Can't erase everything. The concrete floor will keep everything quiet. Handwriting analysis confirmed the writing belonged to Lindley Renard, matched against her signature on the insurance contract. This discovery led Megan to conclude that Ashley Shaw may have been the only witness, witting or unwitting, who helped Lindley dispose of evidence immediately after the disappearance. Ashley was long dead, but her notes constituted the first indirect evidence describing concealment behavior. In the report to her superiors, Megan wrote, "Second-hand witness testimony and recovered documents indicate Lindley Renard was present at the scene on the night of the disappearance. The act of mixing and pouring cement matches the location where evidence was recovered in 2016. High probability this was an attempt to conceal remains." The report was immediately forwarded to the state prosecutor's office to prepare an application for expanded investigative warrants. In her office, Megan looked again at the brown leather notebook, its pages fluttering slightly in the air conditioning, and felt the line between history and crime growing ever thinner. A woman had vanished from Martinsville in 1944, yet what she left behind, through the words of an old friend, now rang out as clearly as a belated confession sent from the past. After cross-referencing the statements in Ashley Shaw's notebook, Megan Crowell widened the search, combing federal databases for any records connected to anyone who had worked or lived on the Renard property between 1940 and 1946. 1 week later, an unexpected hit arrived from the National Archives facility in Quantico, a 1946 FBI file numbered F219346 that listed Michael Harper, the only hired hand Benjamin Renard ever had according to the original case file. The file was not civil but classified under interstate trade violations. The report title read, "Investigation into Interstate Trafficking of Exotic Animal Skins, Indiana 1946. Reading the details, Megan saw Harper's name repeated multiple times, along with allegations that he was involved in smuggling snakeskins and venom to Chicago and St. Louis, using the Renard farm as a transit point. One line from the case agent's notes read, "Subject previously employed by B. Renard. Unconfirmed involvement in disappearance. Possible connection. Not pursued." That short phrase, "not pursued," stopped Megan cold. It meant that as early as 1946, the FBI had been aware of Benjamin Renard's disappearance and had at least considered Harper's possible involvement, but for lack of evidence or jurisdiction they had dropped it. The file also contained another internal memo dated September 4, 1946, describing Harper's brief detention in Missouri while transporting 37 undeclared snakeskins and several drums of chemicals labeled as pharmaceuticals. He claimed the goods were legally purchased from an old source in Martinsville, but the invoices and permits were forged. After 3 days of questioning, he was released for insufficient evidence of smuggling. The final note, however, stated, "Subject planned return to Indiana for personal matters. Disappeared shortly after release." After that, Michael Harper vanished from both federal and state records. Declared missing in 1946, just 2 years after Benjamin Renard. Megan requested full copies of all 72 pages and had them digitized at the cold case unit. Cross-referencing revealed that Harper's detention coincided exactly with the period when Lindley Renard had already left the state and sold all the property. One additional FBI entry noted that Harper had mailed a letter to a Mrs. R. in Chicago proposing to renegotiate an outstanding payment related to the laboratory. Though no direct proof existed, the likelihood that Mrs. R. was Lindley could not be ignored. An appendix to file F219346 included copies of 2 internal teletypes, one of which, sent to the Bloomington office, requested a check of the former Renard farm for illegal commercial activity, but was crossed out in red ink with the remark, "Case closed, jurisdiction transferred." In other words, the investigation was halted when Benjamin Renard's missing person case was officially closed in August 1944. The phrase "possible connection, not pursued" remained the only surviving evidence that the link between the two men, employer and employee, had once been noticed and then ignored. In her briefing to command, Megan wrote, 1946 federal records confirm Michael Harper was suspected of illegal activity with direct ties to the Renard facility. His disappearance the same year supports the probability of organized concealment. She requested that Harper's file be merged with Renard's under the same cold case heading to create a single investigative dossier. In a separate memo to the director, she added, Harper may have been a witness or accomplice. His role on the night of the 16th of June 1944 requires verification. That evening, Megan opened the old Martinsville Herald again, studied the photograph of the Renard farm, then looked up at the computer screen displaying the faded FBI typescript. 7 decades earlier, an employer and his hired man had both vanished, leaving only scattered notations in yellowing folders. But now that the documents were finally connected, a picture was taking shape. Old smuggling routes, illicit cargo, and seemingly ordinary people living through wartime, all pointing to the possibility that Benjamin Renard's disappearance had never been random, but the submerged part of a darker chain of events hidden by time and silence. With the new evidence from the FBI file and Ashley Shaw's notes in hand, Megan Crowell submitted a formal request to the Indiana Attorney General's office to re-excavate the former Renard farm site where the metal trunk had been found. A second excavation warrant was approved on September 5, 2016, with participation from the Morgan County Sheriff's Department, the State Medical Examiner's Office, and the Indiana University Forensic Archaeology Team. The target was the entire floor of the old snake barn, previously overlooked because of the thick concrete layer. As the first core drills bit in, the concrete cracked and revealed dark, damp soil beneath. Soil blocks were removed and sifted with precision instruments. Every step was filmed and GPS marked. Just 3 hours in, a technician knelt in the southwest corner, where the soil was noticeably softer, and spotted the tip of a small bone protruding. As surrounding dirt was carefully brushed away, longer bones emerged, in an arrangement consistent with a human body. The area was immediately sealed, and the team pulled back to observation positions. Lead forensic anthropologist Dr. Klein personally supervised the recovery. Under harsh floodlights, an almost complete skeleton gradually appeared, lying on its left side, arms drawn across the chest, head facing north. Beside it lay a heavily corroded metal ring, a belt buckle, and scraps of wool fabric still clinging to the ribs. The same material as the work shirts Benjamin Renard was known to wear. A few inches away, the team recovered the broken face and crystal of a pocket watch. The leather strap was rotted away. When compared, it matched the Elgin watch with the engraved L found earlier in the trunk, only this was the remaining strap portion of the same watch. Beneath the right ribs was a small round metal object, an old oxidized 9mm bullet embedded in the soil. The surrounding earth showed reddish iron staining suggestive of blood seepage. Samples were collected and sealed. Within 24 hours, the entire 2x3 grid was fully excavated, yielding 142 items, including the complete skeleton, metal fragments, cloth fibers, and sediment samples. Everything was transported directly to the Indianapolis Forensic Laboratory. Initial examination confirmed a male, aged approximately 35-40, height 5'10", matching Benjamin Renard's 1944 description perfectly. On the right occipital region of the skull was a circular perforation with radiating fracture lines, classic close-range gunshot entry wound. The bullet path ran posterior to anterior at a downward angle, indicating the victim was likely bending or kneeling when shot from behind. Microanalysis of soil adhering to the fracture margins detected copper and nitrate residues consistent with gunpowder from the Smith & Wesson .38 recovered from the trunk, confirming the bullet was of matching caliber. During bone cleaning, technicians also noted patches of concrete residue on the ribs and arm bones, proving the body had been buried and then immediately covered with wet cement, exactly as described in Ashley Shaw's notebook entry about mixing cement the night Ben disappeared. By September 14th, the lab performed dental DNA comparison. Because nuclear DNA had degraded, mitochondrial DNA was extracted from tooth pulp and matched against a 1938 hair sample preserved in Benjamin Renard's old Bloomington Hospital medical file. The result was a 99.98% match. The final report stated, human remains excavated from the snake barn floor, coordinates 39°25 N, 86°27 W, belonged to Benjamin Renard, missing since 1944. Mechanical trauma and remaining projectile confirmed death by close-range gunshot wound. The body was buried and covered with concrete immediately post-mortem. Simultaneously, another patch of disturbed soil roughly 1 meter away yielded scraps of linen cloth and the head of a small hammer, likely tools used during burial. All new evidence was appended to case hash 440617, now reclassified from missing person cause unknown to homicide. Active investigation. An internal State of Indiana bulletin issued September 16 announced, the 1944 Benjamin Renard missing person case has been ruled a homicide. Cause of death, penetrating cranial trauma by gunshot. Case reclassified under Indiana Code 35421. As Megan read the report in the cold case unit office, she paused at the bold line. Death confirmed homicide. A disappearance once buried beneath concrete had finally revealed its full shape. What remained of Benjamin Renard, the skeleton, the watch, the bullet now stood as irrefutable proof that he had not simply vanished on a rainy night in 1944, but had been murdered and concealed beneath the floor of his own farm. When she signed the routing memo, Megan wrote simply, after 72 years, the victim has been located. Renard file officially a homicide. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the air conditioner and the cold light reflecting off the old black and white photograph of the snake barn floor, where a crime once hidden had just been brought into the light. With Benjamin Renard's skeleton positively identified and the case officially reclassified as homicide, Megan Crowell and the team entered the crime reconstruction phase, combining forensic data, historical testimony, and physical evidence to establish the exact sequence of events on the night of June 16, 1944. From skull and soil analysis, they concluded the victim was struck from behind with a heavy blunt object inside the snake barn, a blow hard enough to render him unconscious immediately. The fracture pattern on the occipital bone matched the small hammerhead recovered nearby. After collapsing, Benjamin was dragged a short distance, evidenced by abrasion scratches on the outer surface of the tibia and elbow bones. The leather strap found in the trunk showed stretch marks and indentations consistent with having been tightened around a human neck. Cause of death was determined to be asphyxia, combined with traumatic brain injury, time of death between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m., matching the moment Benjamin's Elgin wristwatch stopped at 8:52 p.m. due to violent impact. Cross-referencing old records, that was precisely the window when Lindley told police her husband had gone back out to the snake barn to check a leaking roof. When combined with Ashley Shaw's account of Lindley arriving at midnight, asking for cement to seal the floor, the team established that concealment took place the same night, only hours after death. Chemical analysis of the excavated concrete showed it had been mixed with rainwater and was still fresh when poured, consistent with the storm recorded in weather reports for June 16. Footprints preserved under the concrete layer showed two different shoe sizes, one large Benjamin's, one small Lindley's, but the stride patterns were inconsistent. One set showed dragging, the other upright walking. The investigators concluded Benjamin was attacked inside the barn, collapsed, was strangled to ensure death, then buried directly beneath the floor. Lindley could not have moved the body alone, so assistance was required, and the only other person known to be on the property that night was Michael Harper. The 1946 FBI file evidence of Harper's shady business ties to Lindley, plus his own later disappearance, strongly supported accomplice status. Using 3D crime scene reconstruction software, the team recreated the scene, victim slumped beside the preparation table, impact mark on the metal wall, blood spatter direction onto the wooden panel behind, then the short drag path to the floor pit. The concrete layer was poured thinly over the shallow grave, topped with gravel and odor-masking material. The barn was then tidied to appear as if work had been interrupted. When police arrived the next morning, they saw only an open door and partially wet concrete, which they took as normal repair work. Lindley remained calm and repeated the prepared story of her husband going out in the rain and vanishing, perfectly aligning with the occupational accident narrative the press later echoed. The fact that Benjamin's watch stopped at the exact moment of death became the key time marker. Forensic analysis confirmed the watch damage pattern resulted from sudden impact, followed immediately by water immersion, meaning it fell with the body onto the wet floor. Weather records showed rain beginning at 8:30 p.m. and continuing past midnight, further narrowing the time of death to the 9:10 p.m. window. Megan presented to the review board, the most probable sequence is Benjamin returns to the snake barn, encounters Harper and Lindley. An argument ensues, possibly over insurance money or business. Harper strikes him on the head with the hammer, rendering him unconscious. Lindley uses the leather strap to strangle him to ensure death. The two bury the body, pour concrete over the floor. The next morning Lindley reports him missing. In the technical section, experts noted the soil surrounding the bones contained high calcium levels and molecular protein residues from freshly poured concrete, fully consistent with immediate burial post-mortem. Local soil, moisture and temperature in that period also explained the rapid decomposition and near-total absence of soft tissue. At the end of the report, Dr. Klein wrote, "Combining all physical, biological, temporal, and witness evidence, it is reasonable to conclude Benjamin Renard was the victim of a deliberate assault, died at the scene, and was buried beneath freshly poured concrete on the night of June 16, 1944. The concrete pour served to conceal the crime, not to repair the structure." Reading those words, Megan understood that every scattered fragment collected over 72 years had finally clicked into place. The disappearance was not random, but the outcome of a calculated plan in which Lindley and Harper together staged the perfect vanishing, an ordinary man disappearing into a summer storm, leaving behind only a smooth concrete floor and a watch forever stopped at 8:52. While reviewing historical documents related to the Renard case, Megan Crowell received notification from the State Judicial Archives Office that an unsealed envelope labeled Lindley M. Renard, Last Will and Testament, 1982, remained in the old case files of the Morgan County Court. The document had been discovered when archive staff were digitizing unregistered materials, found it mixed in with a box of unclaimed probate records. Upon opening the envelope, they found 12 typewritten pages on yellowed paper, bearing the handwritten signature, Lindley M. Renard, and a local notary seal, dated May 14, 1982. The will had never been probated due to the absence of direct heirs and had never been processed by the court. As soon as Megan read it, she realized this was not merely a distribution of assets, but contained extraordinarily personal content. Lindley wrote about the persistent haunting of a summer in 1944, about the pounding that echoes in my head every rainy night, and the man left lying where no one remembers anymore. In the opening section, she admitted to carrying a burden from which I could never be freed, and expressed the wish to be buried near the old farm, as if to return what was taken. A handwritten marginal note on page 8 caught the investigators' attention. "If someone ever finds where he lies, tell him I no longer had the courage to ask forgiveness, only to wait my turn for judgment." Although Benjamin's name was never mentioned, the entire content clearly alluded to the 1944 disappearance. At the very end, in trembling handwriting, Lindley added, "He did not deserve to die. I let everything go too far." To authenticate the document, Megan requested handwriting and ink analysis. The Indiana State Police Forensic Laboratory compared the signature, lettering and pen strokes in the will against Lindley's known administrative documents preserved in local records from the 1940s. The results showed a perfect match with no signs of forgery. The ink used in the will also matched commercially available writing ink common in the early 1980s, confirming the document was genuinely created at that time. Lindley died in 1983 in Illinois, having deposited this will with the court in accordance with probate regulations. In the final legal summary of the document, she directed a small portion of her estate to a scholarship fund for toxicology research, adding a separate note, "In memory of the one who once helped me see the light, even though I extinguished it." When the report reached the cold case unit, Megan assessed it as indirect but highly valuable evidence establishing motive and ultimate remorse. The will not only reinforced the conclusion of premeditated murder, but also revealed decades of torment, proving Lindley was fully aware of her actions and lived in fear until the end of her life. The supplemental forensic evaluation stated, "The content and language used in the document reflect guilt, self-incrimination, and post-traumatic obsession commonly observed in individuals involved in concealing serious criminal acts." Megan entered the document into the case file as supplemental evidence 17B, labeled Indirect Confession. She reread Lindley's final lines, weak, slanted letters, written almost in a tremble. "No one can understand what price I have paid, but it does not bring him back." Those words, though legally insufficient for conviction, carried the weight of an insider's admission. After 72 years, Lindley Renard's final silence finally spoke through the yellowed pages, still faintly smelling of old ink, closing the circle of guilt that began in the summer of 1944, now exposed by the very hand that created it. After adding Lindley Renard's will to the file, Megan Crowell's investigative team completed a comprehensive compilation of all evidence related to the case and submitted it to the Indiana State Prosecutor's Office in late October 2016. The report, exceeding 250 pages, included sections on forensic analysis, DNA testing, physical evidence comparison, financial records, and statements from surviving witnesses. First, the physical evidence confirmed that victim Benjamin Renard died from cranial trauma and mechanical asphyxiation, with the time of death matching the stopwatch on the night of June 16, 1944. Traces of cement and foundation structure proved the body was buried the same night beneath freshly mixed concrete. The bullet lodged in the skull matched the caliber fired from the Smith & Wesson .38 revolver recovered from the metal box. The leather strap used to strangle him bore partial fingerprints. Although incomplete, the ridge characteristics matched 80% with Lindley's prints preserved in her 1936 immigration file. Financial records from Martinsville Bank showed that Lindley and her husband co-signed a mortgage credit agreement for the farm in early 1944, yet only 2 months later, Lindley purchased a new $25,000 life insurance policy, a very large sum at the time, naming her husband as the insured and herself as the sole beneficiary. Copies of the policy, still retained by Bloomington Mutual Insurance, confirmed payout in September 1944, 3 months after the disappearance was reported. Lindley received the full amount, withdrew from Martinsville, and moved to Illinois that same year. From witness Ashley Shaw's statement, investigators determined she had been coerced by Lindley into mixing cement on the night of the murder under the pretext of sealing cracks in the snake barn, in reality, an act of concealment. Ashley's preserved notebook, containing Lindley's handwriting and matching dates, was accepted as corroborating evidence. Regarding Michael Harper, 1946 FBI documents revealed he had been investigated for snakeskin smuggling and had direct ties to the Renard farm. An internal FBI report dated March 12, 1946 noted, "Possible connection, not pursued." That same year, Harper vanished from Indiana without a trace. His mention in the records and presence at the farm on the rainy night further solidified his role as an accomplice. In the analysis of Lindley's 1982 will, the Forensic Institute confirmed the signature was genuine and the content clearly displayed guilt and allusions to murder. Specifically, the phrases "the man left lying where no one remembers anymore" and "I let everything go too far" were regarded as indirect admissions. Combined with Ashley's testimony and forensic data, investigators established the crime mechanism, Lindley as the mastermind, Harper as the accomplice. The primary motive was determined to be financial, seizing the life insurance proceeds and avoiding bankruptcy due to the bank loan. The final report concluded, based on the totality of physical, biological, financial, and testimonial evidence, it can be established that Lindley M. Renard directly caused the death of her husband, Benjamin Renard, on the night of June 16, 1944, with assistance from Michael Harper. After the victim's death, the two buried the body beneath the snake barn floor and poured concrete to conceal it. The act was premeditated, with clear economic motive, and was covered up by a false report of an occupational accident. The 1944 case file was erroneously closed due to technical limitations and wartime conditions. The report also noted the absence of third-party involvement or evidence of extortion or other personal conflicts. The concluding summary stated, although the primary subjects are deceased, the existing evidence provides sufficient scientific and legal grounds to reclassify the offense as premeditated murder. Case hash 440617 is closed with the finding. Homicide. Perpetrator identified posthumously. When Megan signed the final page, she felt the full weight of every year the truth had lain buried beneath cold concrete. The dry phrases financial motive, life insurance became the answer to a 72-year-old mystery, proving that Benjamin Renard's disappearance was not fate, but a calculated and concealed crime committed in the silence of wartime, now finally answered. Following the release of the 2016 final report, the Indiana State Prosecutor's Office proposed holding a symbolic trial to formally acknowledge the investigation results and restore the victim's honor. On November 18, 2016, a solemn proceeding was convened at the Morgan County Courthouse in Bloomington, presided over by Judge Harold D. Linton, and attended by representatives of the prosecutor's office, the cold case unit, local historians, and regional media. On the evidence table, all items were displayed in order: the excavated metal box, the rusted Smith & Wesson .38, the leather strangulation strap, the Elgin watch, stopped at 8:52, Ashley Shaw's notebook, and Lindley Renard's 1982 will. The session opened with Prosecutor Elizabeth Moore reading the symbolic indictment on behalf of the state. The deceased defendant, Lindley M. Renard, born 1915, is charged with the premeditated murder of her husband Benjamin Renard in Martinsville, Indiana, on the night of June 16, 1944. Accomplice, Michael Harper, missing since 1946. Charged second-degree murder, financial motive. Investigator Megan Crowell then presented the entire case-breaking process from the 2016 discovery of the metal box, the excavation of the snake barn floor, to DNA confirmation and will analysis. She described in detail how Benjamin was attacked, strangled, buried under concrete, and how the sophisticated cover-up caused the crime to be misclassified as a mysterious disappearance for over 7 decades. Forensic experts projected 3D models of the crime scene and examination results confirming time of death, cause of death, and matching physical evidence. The prosecution closed by arguing, had this case been tried at the time of the offense, the evidence now available would have been sufficient to convict Lindley Renard of premeditated murder with aggravating circumstances for profit motive. The state prosecutor's representative added that although legal sentencing was no longer enforceable, the court bore a historical duty to affirm the truth and the victim's honor. When invited to speak, Megan said only 72 years cannot erase the traces of a crime. We simply completed the remaining portion of justice. Judge Linton then read the symbolic verdict, recognizing the charge of second-degree murder against Lindley M. Renard and confirming Michael Harper as accomplice. Though brief, the pronouncement was delivered slowly, each word deliberate. The state of Indiana court, in the name of truth and justice, declares the deceased Lindley M. Renard guilty of second-degree murder of Benjamin Renard. Motive, financial. acts, intentional deprivation of life, and concealment of the body. The case is closed 72 years after the offense. When the gavel fell, the courtroom fell silent. Afternoon light filtered through dusty old windows, reflecting off the wooden table holding the corroded evidence, the final testament to a tragedy that had slept for nearly a century. Local newspapers ran the headline, "Justice Delivered, 72 Years Late, Indiana Cold Case Finally Closed." Case #440-617 was officially moved to Solved Historical Homicides in the state archives. A small brass plaque was mounted at the courthouse gate, reading, "Benjamin Renard, 1908-1944. The truth was returned to him in 2016. As people left the room, Megan lingered for a moment, looking at the evidence that had defined her 2-year journey, closing the longest-running case in Martinsville history. The 1944 disappearance had finally been given its true name, a murder acknowledged by justice, even if 7 decades late. After the symbolic trial concluded, the Indiana State Police issued a special evaluation of the Renard case titled Analysis of the Reasons for the 1944 Investigation Failure, intended to draw professional lessons for the entire investigative system. Compiled by the Cold Case Unit, the document reviewed original files, scene notes, interview transcripts, and period-specific factors to explain why a premeditated murder was classified as an unexplained disappearance. The introduction identified the primary causes: wartime forensic limitations, lack of experience in scene processing, and administrative pressure that led to premature closure. In 1944, Martinsville was a small farming town with only 4 permanent officers and a sheriff who also served as office manager. They lacked examination equipment, cameras, or evidence collection kits. Scene documentation relied entirely on notebooks and sketches. The initial report contained no photographs, only the description, no signs of struggle, no blood, cement still wet. Yet the wet cement was critical evidence that should have been thoroughly examined. No one asked why fresh concrete had been poured, nor was any note made of chemical odors or unusual hardness in the floor. The second major error was failure to seal the crime scene. The day after the disappearance was reported, police allowed family and farm workers to continue entering the snake barn, destroying all traces. The ground was trampled, footprints overlapped, and heavy rain made analysis impossible. Additionally, the 1944 file contained no records of soil, hair, or material samples, standard procedure in any missing person case. Lack of interagency coordination also caused rapid deadlock. Records show the state police offered forensic assistance, but were refused because no criminal indicators were present. With the nation at war, resources were diverted to military needs, and civilian cases received low priority. Sheriff Roy Atkins was forced to close the file as unexplained disappearance to meet quarterly reporting deadlines, after which it was administratively archived with no further oversight. The Cold Case Unit also highlighted a human factor, gender bias, and contemporary moral assumptions. Lindley Renard, an educated woman and business owner in a small community, was viewed as the archetype of a model wife, so suspicion was directed outward. No one considered her possible involvement. The investigator's notebook from the time stated, "No apparent motive, victim's wife cooperative, and genuinely grief-stricken." They overlooked that Lindley was the first to report the disappearance and had been alone at the scene before police arrived. Witness interviews were limited to 2 days with no recordings, leaving Michael Harper's statement only as a brief summary, "Heard noise during the night. Source unclear." When the FBI opened a 1946 file on Harper for suspected smuggling, they noted possible connection to the Renard case, but could not reopen it because the original file had not been classified as criminal. The Cold Case Unit described this as a classic example of poor archiving and interagency information sharing, causing crucial evidence to be lost for over half a century. The report devoted a separate section to scene processing skills: no panoramic photos, no site diagram, No measured distances from the main house to the snake barn, the most basic requirements. Officers at the time received no training in evidence preservation. Many small items were discarded as irrelevant. The final assessment was blunt. Had 1944 examination and preservation procedures met even 50% of current standards, the Renard case could have been solved within weeks. The cold case unit therefore recommended 3 main lessons. 1. In every missing person case, treat the scene as a potential crime scene until proven otherwise. 2. Evidence collection, documentation, and preservation must follow scientific standards, not intuition. 3. Case files must be digitized and shared across agencies to prevent data loss. The conclusion read, "The Renard case reminds us that justice depends not only on modern technology, but on human care, skepticism, and persistence. The truth was always there, it only waited to be seen." The evaluation was added to the Indiana Police Academy curriculum in 2017 and became a standard teaching example of the importance of crime scene work. For Megan Crowell, closing the case also closed a chapter in investigative history where the mistakes of 1944 were corrected by the efforts of a century later, reminding everyone that in criminal investigation, the smallest oversight today may be why justice must wait another 70 years. On December 12, 2016, 2 months after the symbolic trial and after the final reports were completed, the Indiana State Police held an official press conference at the Bloomington Administrative Building to announce the results of the Benjamin Renard investigation, the longest-running missing person case in state history. The event was attended by representatives from the Department of Justice, the State Forensic Laboratory, the Cold Case Unit, and more than 30 reporters from local and national outlets. On the main podium, lead investigator Megan Crowell presented the entire investigative process, showing images of each excavation stage, 3D crime scene reconstructions, and the decisive items of evidence. Beside her was a display table holding the rusted metal box, the Smith & Wesson .38, the Elgin watch stopped at 852, Ashley Shaw's notebook, and Lindley Renard's will, all in glass cases labeled with evidence numbers and examination dates. The State Forensic Lab detailed the modern techniques applied: mitochondrial DNA analysis from dental tissue, blood type O confirmation from residual proteins, and radiocarbon isotope analysis of the cement that dated the pour precisely to 1944. Notably, laser scanning and mechanical modeling of the snake barn floor against old blueprints located the burial site with less than 3 inches of error, a major advance for historical cold case investigation. The scientific report emphasized that technology was merely a tool. The real breakthrough came from human factors, from the initial metal detector discovery to persistent archival review. When Megan announced the final conclusion, Benjamin Renard, death by premeditated homicide, 1944. Perpetrator, Lindley Renard. Accomplice, Michael Harper. Case closed, 2016. The room fell silent for several seconds before camera shutters clicked furiously. Media called it a victory for belated justice and the gold standard of 21st century cold case investigation. Major outlets, including the Chicago Tribune and Indianapolis Star, published in-depth articles on the case reopening, viewing it as a milestone in combining modern forensics with historical records. The Martinsville community, where the events occurred, reacted strongly. Elderly residents who remembered wartime rumors of the snake farmer who vanished as children now saw the truth revealed. Some families who once worked at the Renard farm attended, bringing black and white photos of the old property. They said it felt as though the last shadow had finally been lifted from this land. The town later held a small memorial ceremony at the public library, recreating the crime scene diagram and displaying replicas of the evidence. The local high school invited Megan to speak about criminal investigation and the importance of perseverance in seeking truth. Within the investigative community, the Renard case became a model cold case resolution. The Police Academy incorporated the complete file into its training program, especially the module Reconstruction of Historical Crime Scene. Forensic experts regarded it as proof of the long-term value of evidence preservation and advances in trace analysis. In Washington, the FBI sent congratulations and offered to collaborate on applying the same methodology to similar century-old cases. Beyond professional pride, the case shocked the public because of its human dimension. A crime concealed by a woman once regarded as a community moral exemplar. Many editorials noted that wartime society had inadvertently created legal gaps and blind trust in appearances, allowing crime to persist unquestioned. The press conference concluded with the announcement of the documentary, The Renard Case: Truth Beneath the Concrete, produced by the Indiana State Police, compiling excavation footage, witness accounts, and investigative steps. Before stepping down, Megan said simply, "We did not merely close a case, we opened a reminder that no secret remains buried forever." The quote was repeated across media and became the slogan for the statewide cold case review campaign. In the days that followed, Martinsville residents brought flowers to the brass plaque outside the courthouse reading, "Justice Returned," 72 years later. 7 decades of silence ended in the light of truth, and the Renard case became a symbol of how justice that may arrive slowly, but never loses the trail. After the press conference ended and all documents were made public, the cold case unit completed the final step of the legal process, officially closing the Benjamin Renard case file. On December 20, 2016, the original case file numbered #440617, which had been stored under missing person, unresolved for more than 7 decades, was transferred to the Central Electronic Data Archive and reclassified in the system as solved cold case files. All physical evidence, from the iron box, the gun, the leather strap, to the will, was sealed, cataloged, and stored in the temperature-controlled preservation room of the Indiana State Forensic Institute. The 287-page final report, accompanied by 42 appendices of photographs and expert analyses, was sent to the Indiana Department of Justice for inclusion in the Historical Homicide Resolution Catalog. On the first page of the report, in bold letters, it read, "Case #440617, closed and verified. Homicide identified after 72 years. This was the oldest case ever solved in Indiana judicial history, surpassing the previous record by more than 3 decades. The Department of Justice issued an official statement recognizing the cold case unit and the Indiana State Police for an extraordinary achievement in restoring historical justice. A copy of the file was sent to the State Justice Museum for research purposes, along with a dedicated exhibit titled Justice Across Time. Outside the Morgan County Courthouse, a small commemorative plaque was added, bearing the inscription, "Renard Case, the oldest criminal case resolved in Indiana state history, 1944-2016. In the final report, lead investigator Megan Crowell wrote a brief closing remark, "No case is truly closed until the truth is recorded." 72 years was merely the distance justice needed to find its way back to the right path. After signing her name, she placed her pen beneath the line, "Final Status, Closed," marking the end of a journey that had lasted more than half a century. That same day, the digital file was uploaded to the Cold Case Network, tagged Oldest Case Solved, Indiana State Record. Operational units received copies for training materials, while the press called it the resurrection of a wartime case. As the storage vault door closed, the amber light shone on the box labeled #440617, resting among thousands of others, like a silent witness to perseverance and progress. The Renard case was officially closed, but in Indiana judicial history, it will continue to be remembered as proof that no crime is buried forever. There is only truth waiting for someone persistent enough to find it. The story of the Benjamin Renard case, a 1944 disappearance in Indiana, solved after more than 7 decades, is not just a journey to restore justice, but also a profound reflection of the values that modern America continues to pursue: transparency, perseverance, and faith in the truth. From the investigative errors of 1944, when local police, lacking resources, hastily concluded that Benjamin had disappeared without explanation, to 2016. When DNA technology, forensic techniques, and the relentless spirit of the cold case unit exposed the full extent of the crime, we clearly see that scientific progress only truly matters when accompanied by professional ethics and integrity. The discovery of the iron box buried beneath concrete, the watch stopped at 8:52, and the will written by Benjamin Renard in 1982 show that time may erase traces, but it cannot erase the consequences of lies and greed. In today's American society, where news spreads faster than ever, this story reminds us that truth must be protected with care and responsibility, not hasty conclusions. For the justice system, the Renard case is a lesson in the importance of preservation and never dismissing even the smallest detail, because sometimes justice lies in a speck of dust, a streak of cement, or a faded handwritten line. For every ordinary American, the story serves as a reminder that fairness may come late, but as long as there are people who still believe in it, justice can still be found, even if it takes 72 years. That simple yet profound lesson forms the foundation of American society's faith that nothing is buried forever if people still dare to seek the truth. Thank you for following the story of the Benjamin Renard case. Proof that justice may arrive late, but it never loses its way. Please subscribe to the channel so we can explore more unsolved mysteries together, where the past still holds truths waiting to be revealed.